Thank you very much for the time and for the invitation to be the last speaker in your conference. I hope you have a very good two-day conference with a lot of information. I will share a few insights, first a little bit about marks that I'm representing and about myself and the company I work for, a few examples of what we see in bad faith situations. I will try to go through this quickly because I know that we're already running out, but Zeger and Joël, thank you for your presentations, and there is likely, of course, some overlap, so we will be able to skip some of these things. So a little bit quickly about myself. I'm a senior IP specialist trademarks at DSM. DSM is a global company particularly active in nutrition and health for people and for animals and for the planet, very important. We are a B2B company, but are growing into B2C activities. Yeah, we see different issues in these different fields. 30 years experience in what I call marketing IP, so not only trademarks, but also branding topics, copyright, domain names, which we see are always intertwined. I'm a certified trademark attorney, recognized in Europe. I'm the chair of the Marks Anti-Counterfeit and Parallel Trade team, which I will explain in a minute, and I represent Marks and DSM in the European Observatory. So there's a lot of text about Marks. I won't read it all through, but as you can see, it's an organization that exists already for quite some time, and we represent the interest of brand owners. So we have a large group of members from a variety of countries. Brand owners, including some of the well-known brands, but also quite a wide range of industry sectors with IP professionals supporting the brand owners in the protection of their IP rights. And our objective is particularly to safeguard the interest of the people and the public by ensuring proper protection of trademarks, but also the interest of IPR proprietors with regards to the whole regime of IPR protection. What's a very important tool is we share best practices and new ideas. And because of the large scope of the team, we can do that in relation to multiple jurisdictions and countries where we have representatives. We promote also the professional development of members, which is extremely important. So we have training opportunities and sharing of these best practices. Marks is an accredited organization and a permanent observer before the EU IPO and at WIPO. And we participate in the EU IPO network, in the observatory, in WIPO working groups and consultations of the EU Commission. And as I said, I represent Marks, chair of the Anti-Counterfeit Parallel Trade Group, and in that I represent Marks in the observatory. Some of the activities we organized, very well-known Meet with the Judges in Europe, but also abroad, including in China and Asia since 2008. And we have a strong cooperation with INTA, but also other associations like AIM, ACTA, the China Trademark Association, which is a valuable connection, ICC BESCAP, and many others. And I will not go through all of them. So just to recap the issue of bad faith, what is it actually saying? It's the trademark owner who registers and uses or allows a licensee to use a trademark in certain countries. And I just define that as area A. That trademark owner likely doesn't have a registration or not a sufficient registration in other countries, which I would call B. And then someone other than the trademark owner applies for an identical or a confusingly similar trademark in this area B. And obviously this someone takes advantage of the legitimate trademark owner's business investment, the reputation, and the equity built in countries A, which could be flowing over to country B. And more importantly, and I think that's also something that Joël touched on, it misleads consumers, customers, and it misrepresents the trademark owner and the original trademark. And that's what we perceive as very high risk, because the impression is given that these products might derive from the original trademark owner, meeting certain requirements of quality, delivery opportunities, and that is not always met by the bad faith registrant. So I have two practical examples from my personal practice. The first one relates to the Dyneema trademark. Dyneema is a trademark for a very strong fiber. This trademark is registered in many countries for multiple trademark classes. And because the trademark is licensed out, that trademark the registrations are beyond the scope of the original product, as I would call it. that means that protection is quite broad, but it's not always easy and possible also for financial purposes to register that in any country for all these classes. In that situation, an unrelated applicant applied for the Dyneema trademark in a country for a trademark class that was not yet claimed by DSM, and we had to address this. So we filed an opposition, there was a review, there was an appeal, then we get into the court case, then we could go to the High Court. We did win the case, but it took 14 years, and you can imagine the investment that had to be made into this issue. And I think Zeker already nicely showed some of those financial aspects. And we won the case in the end because it was recognized that it could potentially mislead the consumers, and the impression could be given that that product of that applicant was made with our material and would allegedly meet certain requirements and quality standards, which we could not guarantee because it did not contain our material. And that was a very important aspect in winning this case, apart from some other things, but I won't go into detail for that part. Second example, DSM is the owner of the trademark DSM and the company name Royal DSM. It's the English translation of the Dutch original name. An unrelated applicant at that time claimed the trademark Royal DSM in one country for 45 trademark classes. Already that should be a hint to say something is wrong here, because why would someone claim 45 trademark classes? Maybe a few situations where that would apply, but I think in practice that hardly ever happens, and I don't foresee companies selling all products that contain, and services by the way, in all of these classes. The problem was that we then had the requirement to file 45 oppositions. These were all individually handled. And what we see in practice is that some of them are accepted and we have a positive decision. But in some cases, we have a negative decision, which is because each of these applications is handled by their individual examiner. And there is no coherence between the decision making and the understanding of the actual case. So I thought a little bit about options that brand owners could have to address these bad faith registrations. Of course, we can register in very broad territories and all these classes, and Zeker or Joel reflected to that in his presentation. But it's obviously clear that we cannot cover everything. It's a huge investment, and especially if we would register for what I would call defensive purposes, but we don't use the trademark or don't use it yet, or we're waiting for regulatory approval, or all these kind of situations play a role, then that's financially impossible. And we run the risk that after a certain period, people can file non-use cancellation actions, and then we will lose what we invested in. Another option is to re-register in what we would define as high-risk countries. The problem is that refiling is also considered bad faith. So even if we as a trademark owner would register the trademark in a country for a second time within the use period, just to defend our own position and enable us to still work on the plans to launch this product, our second application can be judged as a bad faith application. What's extremely important is to try and obtain recognition as a well-known trademark, but in practice, that's not so easy. There is quite a high threshold. It's not even always possible. And that's an interesting element, because on what grounds will this well-known trademark then be recognized? What we obviously do, we have trademark watching and opposition in place. So we watch our trademarks in a database, and we are signaled if others file trademarks that are identical or similar, we can file opposition, or some other actions depending on the situation at hand. As said, if we have a trademark right that exists for some time, but we don't have use yet because of plans still being worked on or regulatory approval or still trying to find distributors, we run the risk of non-use cancellation action, and that evidentiary burden is on us. We can, of course, do an action on bad faith, but that's also a very high threshold to prove. And it costs a lot of money and are complicated procedures. There are, of course, a lot of cases, bad faith applicants where the owner the applicant files the trademark and then is willing to sell the trademark to us in a conflict situation. We usually don't follow up on this because once you get started, You will get repetitional situations where you have to pay. And most of all, we don't want to make people get rich out of infringing our trademark rights. So there are very occasional exceptions, and I can't go into detail at this point, but usually that is not something that we favor and that we would be willing to do. So what are then the options of the IP offices? What we feel is very important is the recognition of bad faith. Some trademarks are generally known and recognized, so they have already got an established reputation. And I think the Lacoste example is a very good one, because that is a trademark with high reputation, and the brand owner can show a broad range of trademark applications, enforcement evidence, etc. And what we feel is that there should be a difference actually between having a reputation and being well known. And that is something that is up for debate, I would say. Also, if there is a global portfolio and obvious use by a trademark owner, that is something that should be taken into account in judging this bad faith situation. Like I said, if a trademark is offered for sale, it's already an indication that the applicant doesn't really have an interest in using the trademark, but is more interested in making money out of it. We also see situations where one applicant misappropriates trademarks of multiple trademark owners. And that's a very interesting one. If you look at certain registers, you will see that there is one applicant who filed 20, 30, sometimes even more trademarks that were actually owned in other countries by a multitude of trademark owners. And that should be an indication to recognize that there's something wrong here, and that could be a bad faith intent. And indeed the ability to combine cases. So for example, the previous one applicant, multiple trademark owners, but also the example I gave of the 45 classes of Royal DSM, to combine these cases together instead of judging each case by its own merits, which will cost a lot of time and money and with inconsistent results. Another element is very important is the recognition of holding companies, because sometimes the situation is reverted, and we are even being claimed to be bad faith applicants because we have a holding company, and that holding company files multiple trademarks in a broad scale of classes and territories, and that is suddenly recognized as being bad faith, whereas we have a holding company that owns all the trademark rights. That holding company obviously doesn't use the trademarks themselves, but they are used by all the business group. So recognition of that is also crucial. There are IP offices who have added some additional law elements relating to bad faith trademark applications. One example is the China law, where there is a specific mentioning of a bad faith without intent to use to be rejected. And I think there it's an element, and that's Joël, what you described, the recognition of use and what are the plans of this trademark owner, and there should be a burden of proof on their side. Yeah, and the other one is the example that Joël just explained in the US, so I will not go into that one. There are a few key requirements, and they sound very simple and almost like an open door, but they are key, and one of them is cooperation. I mean, there needs to be an understanding at the brand owner side about the restrictions of official authorities and law, because we realize that I can speak as a brand owner. It's easy to say, yeah, but you should judge this differently. But there are laws related to that. And then we come in what Zeker and Joël explained, that there is a real need for collaboration, and also to look at an overarching across borders, how do IP offices handle these types of cases? And on the other hand, an understanding of IP offices and enforcers about the challenges that trademark owners are facing. And there, the sharing of best practices is a very important one, because you see that trademark owners gather in Marks, in INTA, in ACTA, and other associations to discuss these topics, but also to share them with authorities, with the brand owners, to get a better understanding of the opportunities, the risks, possibilities, etc. And like I said, as what we have the China Trademark Association, representatives in Asia, to have also a dedicated focus for certain people on the Asian market, to understand the market, to understand the issues that brand owners are facing, and to understand the opportunities and maybe impossibilities and restrictions of official authorities and law. And only when we do this together, we will be able to make steps here, which starts with indeed the recognition of bad faith, and to discuss together how this could be managed and supported without overcrossing, of course, the boundaries that the law create for that. And I think that was my last slide, if I'm correct. Thank you very much for your attention.